Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome Miss Linda McCauley Freeman, an extraordinary poet. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us. Linda, I hope you've had a good day so far.
Oh, yes.
Good, good. And I know you have a busy day, so we'll get right to the process. So, as Poets of the East, we interview poets from across the globe, try to learn a little bit more about the person. I know for me, when I get a chance to hear even half an hour worth of a poet at a Zoom meeting, it's not enough. I want to learn a little something more about them, where they came from, what interest and what authors set their mind afire. When did they decide they were poets? When were they forced into it by their own internal drive, or were they inspired by someone? So let me ask you this first question. When you think back to your earliest days, what literature, what poetry, what books touched the young child Linda McCauley Freeman?
Well, actually, that's an interesting question. My first reading of poetry was actually my mom's. So my parents both had each of them had a binder or a scrapbook of their own creative process, and my dad was artistic. So he had drawings and lovely things like that, and my mom had poetry. And I wasn't a very good artist. I'm trying to emulate my parents. And but I did find a great affinity with words. And I my first published poem was actually when I was in fourth grade. So I did write a poem when I was in fourth grade and showed it to my mom, and she was so excited and sent it off somewhere, and it was published. So, and then many years passed before I I got another one published. Um, yes, so I always found a great joy um, in words and spent, as many teenagers do, a lot of time writing journals and getting through my teenage years that way.
Let me ask you this. Some children are exposed to what we might call classical fairy tales, classical stories. Others read more contemporary work, picture books, picture encyclopedias. What do you recall any particular books from when you were young?
Oh, well, I was the Nancy Drew age, you know. So I was the Nancy Drew gal, and in fact, I did write a poem and was anthologized in the Nancy Drew anthology that came out a few years ago. So yes, so even my early reading informed my poetry.
Let me ask you this. Obviously, most poets have a great love of literature, they read books all the time, started reading young, continue to read. I was wondering, when did you kind of have that shift of center of balance to when you realized that you were going to be a writer? Do you remember?
That's an interesting question because I think that I always wrote. I always wrote. So I always thought of myself as a writer. My epiphany came. So in my career, um, my paying career, I was pretty much everything that you could do to get paid to write. So I was in my first job was, in magazines, and then I was in advertising, and then I was in corporate communications. I was in newspaper work. So pretty much anything that I could get paid to do. And for a long time, I thought that that was good enough. Um, Here I am, I'm writing creatively, kind of, and getting paid for it. So that was a good thing. And then in, I guess, the 90s, I guess it was. I know I'm dating myself, but I did uh I had a corporate job, high stress corporate job, and I did a writing retreat at Sarah Lawrence College. And I was away for 2 weeks, I believe it was. Maybe it was only a week. I don't remember. But what I do remember is being able to be immersed in that creative environment with other people who cared about poetry as much as I did. And I just cried at the end of the week. I didn't want to leave. It was like heaven to me. And I realized that even though I was getting paid to write, it wasn't feeding my soul the way writing poetry could do. And Thomas Lux, the poet Thomas Lux, who was running the writing program at that time, he said to me, I would accept you here in a heartbeat for the MFA program. And I said, what? You mean you can like get a, why would I pay to get a MFA to be a poet? It doesn't seem like a very good cost analysis, whatever. So, but I was really enthralled by that. And then by the time I left and I was in tears, I was like, I got to do this, but I still had to support myself. So I applied at the time. There were 3 low residency MFA programs in the country. Now there are many, many, but at the time there were 3. And I decided to go to Bennington and turned my life completely around. And in 2004, quit my job and became kind of a 3-prong creative life person, which was the prong of being a writer, being a yoga instructor, and I'm also a swing dance teacher. So I live completely by my own creativity since 2004.
Good for you. That's wonderful. I know when I transitioned to writing, doing copywriting work, uh, I would have to write an honest version before I could write the, should we say, the sales compatible version, because I found that reality and what one needed to write for marketing purposes were, let's just say, they varied a little.
Yes, yes. I went back in college, I was a literature major. They didn't even have when I was going and where I was going, they didn't have a creative writing major, or I would have done that. So I did literature, which was the closest thing. And then years later, when I was in advertising, went back for an alumni event, and one of my professors said, "Oh, so what are you doing now?" And I said, "I'm in advertising." He said, "Oh, you're in lying."
Professional line, please, come on.
So yes, so now I'm in truth. Now I am in truth.
Well, that's one of the things that I mention to poets quite often. I say, in the commercial world, the world that most of us spend too much time in, the mendacity, the foolishness, the lying is just part of the currents of the land. But here in Poetryville, we get a chance to talk truth. We speak from the heart, and that's just so refreshing. In this world, it is so refreshing. Okay, next question. The next question I normally ask is, so were you nourished as a young person to write, to pursue the arts? And obviously you were, so I can put that question to bed. Let me ask you a technical poetry question. Um, there's a range of thinking that goes from only write when you're inspired to write every day for the practice, for the effort to hone your craft. And where on that spectrum from write when you're inspired to write every day, where do you fall in that spectrum?
Well, I think because I had to write for a living for so long, I'm not so like, oh, I have to wait for inspiration, you know? So, so
Corporate time doesn't
honestly,
allow for that.
honestly, what inspiration is a body of time. So if I have a body of time, then I'm inspired to be able to write. And because I am self-employed, sometimes my time is at a premium. And so I try to devote like Thursdays. That's why we're doing this on a Thursday. I try to devote Thursdays to my writing day. But it doesn't always work. And I also will purposely put myself in the way of being able to write, like either signing up for a generative workshop that will give me that time, force me to have that time to write. And yeah, and I'm very fortunate that I don't I love revision as much as I love writing. So to me, the whole process is wonderful. There's nothing more exciting than writing a poem and like, this is absolutely wonderful. And then, the next day you're like, maybe it's not so wonderful. And then going back in and reworking. I just find the whole process very exciting. It always baffled me when writers said they did not like writing.
Well, I've heard peace marchers shout angrily about peace, so I can appreciate the irony. Uh, Let me ask you this: are there themes or topics that you return to again and again?
The poet Stanley Kunitz said that everybody usually just has one theme. For him, it was his father, the death of his father. But yes, I tend to write. I mean, my first two books are pretty much memoir and poetry. So I do really look very closely at my life and experiences that really are personal, but also universal. And one of my teachers at Bennington told me, write what scares you. And I've pretty much been doing that ever since.
Interesting. All right, let me ask you this. Uh, Speaking of topics in general, do you write social commentary work yourself, or is it more personal focus?
Well, I think it's really hard for any creative person in this day not to have what's happening in the world seep into their work because it is personal, right? So what's happening to our country is personal. So yes, so I do have my fair share, maybe a larger share since 2016 of political poems.
Let me ask you this: do you feel poets have a responsibility to address societal matters?
Well, I'll tell you what, I feel like it's so important to put that voice out there. And I personally feel like right now I feel like it's the only thing I can do. It's the only thing I have control over. Let me put it that way.
Sure. Okay, let me ask you this. If a young person came up to you and said, I dabble a little in poetry, but I wonder, is it really worthwhile? I mean, obviously it's not economic. Obviously, society typically just ignores poetry or is thought of as an effete activity. Do you think poetry is important? Would you
Oh, I
argue
think
with them that it's important?
absolutely important. Dana Joy's essay from years ago, Does Poetry Matter? It sure does. It sure does. And I teach a lot of workshops and I do get, the majority of people, because I'm doing workshops at the libraries and at the art cultural centers. And so the people that are coming are not necessarily poets. And they write poetry and they write from their heart. And, I feel like, my job is to help them take what they have and, you know, introduce the idea of craft around it, you know. But but yes, it matters so much to these young people. I mean, they're really passionate about it and they're shy about it and yes, it matters. Anytime you give voice to anyone, it matters.
I often draw the parallel. Well, if poetry was really inconsequential, why is it used in advertising? Why is it used in chanting at sports games? Why is it used in war? Aren't the oldest narratives that we have in civilization all from poets? So that's my typical response. But thank you for your point. Let me ask you this: is narrative important to poets, to poetry?
Well, I think that's very subjective. There are there are there are poets, there are wonderful poets there out there that don't do anything narrative at all. I tend to be more attractive to narrative poetry. I personally write more narrative poetry. Um, so I think that the most important thing is to find the poets and the poetry that speaks to you.
Thank you. What makes a good poet?
Hmm. Well, again, it's very subjective. Um, you could ask, what makes a good poem? It's the same type of question. One of the most valuable things that I learned in graduate school was my very first semester sitting in my very first workshop, and each of us had two poets who were leading each workshop. And I shared my poem, and the first well-published poet said, "Oh, I love the second stanza. You got to get rid of the first stanza." And the second well-published poet said the complete opposite. It's like, I love the, second stanza. You got to get rid of the first, or whatever. It was the complete opposite. And I was like, and so what I learned, the most valuable thing I took away from my MFA was how subjective it is. Yes, there's craft for sure. Everybody can agree on craft, and you could teach craft. And yes, there's style and syntax and all of that kind of stuff. But really, what it comes down to is you have to find your voice, and you have to find what speaks to you, and then you will find the people who that speaks to. And I also had a teacher who said to me, "Well, don't send me poems with cats in them. I don't like cats." You know. And I didn't have any cats. I wasn't writing cats poems. I was like, why is she saying this? Or, send this poem to David Lehman. He likes these kind of poems. Don't send them to me. And I'm like, well, if I'm not writing for my teacher. So, yeah.
I started performing public poetry during the anti-Vietnam War days. So I was writing passionate anti-war poetry. And in Coconut Grove, an artsy part of Miami, I won a contest. To me, poetry and contests should not have anything to do with each other, but there you are, humans. And this gentleman who was a quite established poet pulled me aside and said, Richard, you do good work, but I want to make a suggestion. Don't rhyme. It's just not done. And I said, well, I hear you. And if I wanted to be a popular poet, I would follow your guide to the letter. I said, but here's the thing. For me, I have to honor my muse. And if my muse wants to rhyme, I'm with her all the way. And if she doesn't, and sometimes she doesn't, I'm with her all the way. I won't quite go to the point some people call themselves the vessel, that they just receive this. And I think that's a bit ponderous. But by God, I'll be damned if I'm going to write to a fashion. It's just not for me anyway. Okay, next question. What do you turn to for entertainment when you want to read for entertainment? What are you reading right now? What's on your desk?
Okay, so I'm actually reading a book. I'm actually reading a book for a book club. It's called Slave Master Husband Wife.
My.
Slave Master Husband Wife, I think is the name of it. Yeah. And it's a true story about a pair of slaves that were married that escaped. The woman was a quadroon, so she was very, very light. And so she dressed as a man and he was her slave, and that's how they escaped. So super interesting story. And but interesting from a writer's point of view, because my husband is also a writer, and he started reading it and then he put it aside, and I was like, well, I have to read it for my book club. But the writer did a great job of putting a lot of research into it and a lot of factual information. And it's not badly written at all, but at the same time, it's not a page turner. It's not something that's like, oh, what's happening next? So it's just, yeah, it's like what makes it into something that people can't put down.
Well, that leads me to my next question. I always like to ask my poets, is there let's say, a well-respected author whose work just doesn't work for you?
Oh, sure. There's lots, actually.
Pick
Yeah.
one.
Okay, so yeah, there's ones that I'll read. Lucy Brock-Bride, my really good friend. I have, and every poet should have really good poetry friends that they meet with and share their work, and get feedback. But I mean, I meet with her every Thursday. She's in Chicago. We meet on Zoom, and she's a great reader for my work. But that's one of her favorite poets, and I don't connect with her, with Lucy. Um, so yeah, again, it comes down to, who connects with you. I'm not gonna love abstract poetry. I'm not gonna love, you know, poets that don't seem to have any narrative whatsoever.
Yeah, of all the poets I've heard that are non-narrative, there's only one who I think uses, interestingly enough, metaphors. I think of it as chiming poetry. It doesn't really say much, but there's little vignettes in there that are really kind of cute. So I like him, but I agree with you there. I was thinking, for example, of the author Robert Louis Stevenson,
Mhm.
whose work is canon. It's important work. I must have tried Kidnapped 4 times, and a couple of his other books, and just it's not that I don't mind the pacing. I read Melville, no problem, and lots of other 19th century and 17th century, 16th, 18th century work. But boy, Stevenson just didn't work for me. Okay, last question. When I assume you attend multiple these Zoom poetry events. Is
Mhm.
there anything that, when you began doing these, that surprised you about this global poetry community?
Well, I have to say, the pandemic was wonderful for me because as a writer, what I'm trying to balance like I said, earn my living, with the three things that I do. Poetry is not the one that's going to bring in a whole lot of money. Um, but when I could no longer teach dance, I obviously couldn't get anybody 6 feet apart and teaching dance. We were doing partner dance. So, so suddenly I had a lot, I couldn't work. So I was like, well, this is a really good time to focus on my writing. And that's really when I pulled up my years and years and years of poems and started putting together, first just organizing them, and then realizing that I had I had book material. And my first book came directly out of the pandemic. It wasn't about the pandemic. I used the time of the pandemic to
Right.
write that book. And so yeah. Uh, I'm sorry. What was the question?
I was asking, was there something that surprised you about
Oh yes, yes.
engaging
So
with this
so the
global
pandemic,
community?
yes, because so I got to also workshop with some amazing poets from around the world and connect. The connection, the ability to connect was phenomenal. And to this day, I still connect, like I said. I mean, my poet friend in Chicago has been my friend since we got our MFAs at Bennington. But it wasn't until the pandemic that we realized that we could actually meet weekly using Zoom. Who heard of Zoom before the pandemic, right? So that and getting to work with all these amazing teachers from all over the world and getting to connect and going to workshops that I physically wouldn't have had the time or the money to attend.
Mhm.
It was just so wonderful.
Thank you so much. Well, now's the fun part. Now I'm going to turn to you and say, Linda, would you please share some of your poetry with us?
I would be glad to. So, I was thinking I would start kind of chronologically. So, my first book is called The Family Plot, and it is a memoir in poetry, basically, of my years growing up. And because I wrote it, I'm an old poet. I've been around a long time, right? So I had a wealth of material, and so the book actually starts with a poem, and I'm 4 years old in the poem, and the book ends. It follows right through the death of both my parents, the death of my sister. So that name, the family plot, has a couple of different meanings.
Yeah,
Um,
it has that potential for sure.
yes, exactly, exactly. So that's my first book, and then my second book is called The Marriage Manual, and that one follows me through, or the narrator, um, through two marriages. And the Marriage Manual title again is very tongue in cheek, um, because there really isn't a manual that's going to help. And then I thought I would wrap up with some more recent work. I'm working on my third book now. And by the way, all these books are they were published by Backroom Window Press out of St. Louis, Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri, and they are available on Amazon as well. And I believe there will be a link to my website where you can find out all about me, all about my readings. I do Zoom readings as well as workshops. So I have quite a few Zoom workshops coming up through libraries. So most of them are no cost. So check them out. But let me start with the family plot. Okay. So this one is called I Was Older. Singing to myself and to the mud pie for our big sister's 7th birthday, I didn't notice Paul balancing on the sandbox edge, though I was supposed to be watching him. When he fell, his perfect head smashing into the sharp concrete wall, I heard only his cry, not mine, as I jumped up and sheared my skin on the metal shelf. We walked up the driveway, wailing. My thigh throbbed with each step our little legs could barely make. Paul in front, his overalls blue and white stripes that puckered like a seersucker suit. His left strap fallen off his shoulder, his right hand holding his head, leaking blood in bright rivers. Inside the brick house, my mother grabbed a kitchen towel to hold his head in, screamed for her mother to come downstairs and watch my sister and me while the lady next door drove them to the hospital, worried his blood might stain her white upholstery. When I showed my grandmother my torn thigh, she grumbled, I have better things to worry about. I picked up my mother's coffee cup from the kitchen table, put my mouth over the cold, red imprint of lips.
Wow.
And
Powerful.
as I said, so I do this. Oh, I'm going to read this one because it makes me laugh every time. Um, and anybody who's a poet who does readings will relate to this. This is called My Father Comes to My Poetry Reading. What did you think? Your poems are like stories. Yes, I say. But real poetry rhymes, he says. I like poems that rhyme. So there you go, Rick. My father would have loved your poems.
It's funny. I had a interestingly similar experience. I had a chance to showcase at the Miami Book Fair, which is a huge, huge event. And I was a featured poet on the main stage. And I happened to mention to my parents, who neither of whom are very engaged in the arts or were. And I said, you ought to come. And my dad said, well, I've got a new video recorder. Maybe I can shoot some video. And I went, oh, wow, that'd be amazing. Wow, that would be super. I said, I'm on the main stage. I'm the featured poet. Yeah, if you could, And I was performing with a group of other poets. And I call them the captured chorus. And so we're performing this very political, very social oriented poetry. And so after the event, like you, I went over to my dad and said, "So, what'd you think?" And he said, "Yeah, it was weird." I said, "Okay." I said, "Did you get some video?" And he said, "Oh yeah." So he literally recorded under a minute of video. So I guess he could technically say he recorded something. So that was the only time I ever tried to invite them to any of my performances. But yeah, I totally get your experience.
Exactly. Okay, so as I said, this book does follow them through their deaths. And my mom had one of those slow deaths because she had dementia. So it's called Hands Unfolded in Prayer, Beseeching. It is a blessing, really, the end, after years of failing. The way we stood around her, distant shadows of someone she knew or might have known, her children's erased faces. It is a blessing against the glare of a faded light. But this body before me was home. Still, we bless the body. Pack away her lilted laughter, climbing the stairs. Remember the time when, wishing just once to see her again as she was, rising before us to get her work done, comb our hair, hug us long and hard, her voice saying, "Good morning." And then to balance things, I'll do the one for my dad. Someone I love is dying, and the children we were bow our heads to the past, each holding dear a particular image of our father that the others do not share. Because I am older, I've known him longer and different. Even before his belly and the brief year of the generous mustache that made him look like a Greek fisherman instead of the pale Irishman he was, who pickled at the beach, who had so many arms and legs for all five of us to hang on to as the ocean beat us back to sand. There was the year of teaching me to drive, my fingers gripping the giant steering wheel, his ancient Cadillac, a boat under us, as he instructed me to back slowly into an impossible sleeve. My brothers do not know this particular man in that particular moment, just as I do not know their own moments with our father. When I was very young, before my brothers were born, our father was still our father, shared with me and my sister. But since she's gone, it's just me and the boys.
I've been the only girl for 3 years now, and although my brothers are younger, they live in a kind of masculine authority over me and our father, whose body is clearly giving up hope. As much as we have seen of our father, none of us have ever seen him like this. And the feeling of not knowing how to save him has each of us by the throat. And then the last poem in that book is Home Again. A gray squirrel sits where the treehouse was. Broken slats nailed to the bark hang loose as if now even the tree allowed no girls to ascend. Going back requires hope and defies longing, is never a return to what was, but to what is now not. Memory bends and stretches, shapes a new creation. The love's lovelier, the hurt's harsher. The lattice under the porch where that damn woodchuck lived with her yearly crop of babies is gone. The hours inside the house are gone, but the door is still there, blown open, and the green shutters still cling, though most of the windows are broken. Stories told and retold over time, each slightly different, each absolutely true. The grass my father never mowed, how the boyfriend who became my husband, who became my ex-husband, who became a father of a child he never wanted with me, fertilized the front yard and planted ivy so my father would not have to mow. Who knew the ivy's long locks would choke the wall, destroy the mortar? How each turn of my life became a new road without my ever seeing its one-way sign. So that is the family plot. And as I mentioned in there, the husband, the boyfriend who became the husband, who became the ex-husband, who became a father of a child he never wanted with me. That's great fodder for a book, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
I hear you. I hear you.
there it is. There it is. So this book opens with a little tiny poem called The Fairy Tale. Why did we believe a kiss should solve our problems? One man could be our prince. A glass shoe would never break. Okay. So I think I'll start with how we lived. We lived in the absence of heat. It wasn't always so. There was a time when his morning coffee steaming at our bedside grew cold. We lived bound by what was, as if the right and left shoe still held the correct foot, ignored the unbearable pinch. We lived in the passage of time. Years splayed like a spreadsheet on the wall, our chart of existence aged, unchecked, what we wanted, thought would be. We lived in the knot of discontent. Standing together in the empty kitchen, we listened to the hum of the refrigerator, sliced cherries with sharp knives into pieces so small, only pits and red remained.
Lovely.
I don't often, this book, even though most of my poems are just free form, this book has a lot of different types of forms in it. So this is a sestina to flower. You held a flower in your hand, its petals red against the angry night, the finale of all our fights, and I said, no, I can't go on this way. Your face changed the way the petals of that flower seemed to blanch before my no, how that red struggled between our bodies that night. But I had struggled many nights before I could turn away, before I could see our love was like that flower, cut at the roots, bled red, until I emerged, said no. Then louder, stronger, no. That night, all the self-help books I'd read, passion I'd filed away, good things I'd sifted like flour, could not survive that hour. So there at our door, you stood before my no, championed that flower against the night, and I turned you away. My rose-colored glasses erased their red. Like Braille finally felt and read, all the years and hours I'd wasted away became real in one word, no. That last night became my first night to take a flower inside myself, inhale its red, and return no. The life that was ours became mine that night. I found my way to flower.
Very nice.
Thank you.
I like to, when I invite a poet to share so much of their own truth, their own depth. I think it's only fair that I share something of my own in sort of the same vein. So let me offer you these two little pieces that treat on some of the subjects, but slightly differently. This first one is called Husbands. Since I've been one for 54 years, I claim to know just a little something. My wife and I are nearly used to each other after all these years. So here we go. This is called Husbands. Husbands come complete from home, some that bade them stay, some instead to maybe roam. They can come complete with even more rules than they have feet, more often than enough to confuse every one of history's fools. You may think a new home you will make when in fact you'll be rebuilding on a myriad of old-time mistakes. The tighter the hold of family tradition, it's almost like you'll end up thinking you're on a completely separate mission. Without a significant degree of flexibility, you're daily measuring your chance to flee. And any training eloquence hoped for, emphasized by the loud slamming of doors, works so rarely it barely mars the floor. At most, it gives yon lazy carpenter a few more chores. While shouting and screaming can be exciting, it's very rarely peace igniting. And who came first is really a toughen. You might as well shove a lime bean inside a muffin. Any normal dinner is a compromise. No matter who makes it, it's never wise to completely surprise your loving mate with a chocolate-covered roller skate. Clothing choices can be surprisingly exciting, whether out for chores or even first nighting. One's compatibility seems quite well established. It's amazing how easily it can, in a moment, vanish. Division of labor can be quite tricky, especially when tradition weighs thick and sticky. When some husbands perhaps can be trained, evidence suggests they'll often need reminded. They tend to forget it's just something deep inside them.
Great, great, great. And I enjoy the way you use rhyme. You have some great internal rhymes in there. Very nice, very nice.
And I had a very different experience with my father. He chose his departure time, and many of my relatives who claim to adhere to a Christian Catholic sort of faith were very troubled. Very troubled that he should choose such an exit. But I had this to say about it, and I tend to find maybe a little more compassion in the situation. Dad, all of what is left is the laughter. That's all, in fact, that we're ever after. He walked into a funeral home to unlock and slowly, slyly add to their rolling stock. He purchased a cupboard he would never see recovered, knowing we would visit a certain potent portion illicit. He had stayed and watched her die. He must have, in those long, lonely hours, wondered why. His mom and dad, those Love Street brothers and sisters he all once severed, cancer slowly took them each, loaded them out and stole them like a thief, unmade them like a bed unbleached. Cancer, too, would take Joe and Ed, his brothers. Harry slowly died. Dottie, Dorothy, he cried. He watched her fade slowly, slowly away to hide, and there in that final home they made the last lonely parade. Resting, waiting, attended by the nurse sending at once, he watched cancer take its course, and then one sunny day, just one more delicious, malicious corpse. Stole his wife away little by little, right from her silent, quiet middle. He watched her fade, day by day, in a slow cost, the loss delayed by only months, then weeks, then displayed, then days, till only silence, no matter what you say, even though you may even pray. He purchased the service, stood there, took out his wallet, he calmly nervous, looked around the trees and sky, probably wondered why, paid the ticket, went out into the parking lot, took out his loaded gun and clicked it. He paid the cost, bore the loss, didn't want to be a bother like his wife or even brother. Nothing left to chance, no son or brother's glance. He invited death to dance. His skin cancer diagnosis near his eye, he noticed, had been seen. He'd seen a neighbor, friend, go through this to the end. The skin, the eye, the brain, the brutal pain. In silence, no warrior's death attained. Then slowly, doctor shrouded, go insane, undoubted. The light flickered out. He watched his wife of 40 years fall. He saw his heroic brother after all those years in tears crawl, dragged around a burden, toted. It wasn't him. He chose full-throated. He would not fade or waste away. He had a voice. He made his choice, said his farewells, set up his perch where his ashes fell. Then right there in the driveway outside death's front door, undisguised, put gun to temple and said, no more.
Mm, mm, mm,
And these charming, well-meaning Christian folks were aghast and so critical.
mm.
But he'd been a friend to so many. He'd made so many people laugh. I had to celebrate that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a really good out and times what happens is exactly what just happened between us. I read something that touched you in a way that you could then express what you wanted to express in your way. So I find actually reading poetry and hearing poetry and going to poetry readings very inspirational.
Absolutely.
So thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah. And again, taking those personal experiences, they're so universal. They're personal and universal.
Absolutely.
And that's why we're able to touch people with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I will move on to my more recent work. And just to prove that, you asked about subject matter. So I wrote this poem, which could have gone into my first book, but my first book was already done. So this poem is called Simmering. I come from a dozen ants, tisking my sides, pinching my cheeks between sharp fingers. From a neighborhood of parked cars as first and third base, manhole for home. My skull cracked by a bat as I stood there, lost in my somersault mind. I come from brick houses with post-stamp lawns, bound by chain-linked fences. From dandelions dancing along sidewalk seams, streetlights simmering dust, hydrant spray in summer. I come from hide and seek and dread of not being looked for, of never being found. I come from simmering sauce, garlic, tomatoes, basil, scenting the kitchen in everyone else's home. Aproned mothers calling for supper tinged by their country's tongues. I come from the chaos of too many children, a voice no one ever heard or listened to, from always being good and never good enough. So I talked about Thomas Lux. So I have a poem that he's in called Pajama.
Oh, nice.
Pajama. The poet Thomas Lux once told me he loved the word pajama. Sit in a poem and shake the whole thing awake. Pa-ja-ma. The ja, a German yes between my parents. Pa-ja-ma. I see my father, although I never called him Pa, nor saw him in pajamas. He was an underwear sleeper. like my husband. In fact, I have never seen a grown man wearing pajamas, except in advertisements, especially around Christmas and regarding slippers. Ma or Jam might remind me of any mother but my own. That wholesome image sucked into my brain. Father knows best in pajamas. My mother aproned in the kitchen making jam.
How nice. How nice.
Um, I think I'm going to jump right now to the two political points.
Wonderful. As you may know, I do a little political stuff myself.
I know. There you go. Um, okay. There's so many. Let's see. To our great and anonymous dead, you who suffered baton blows, cuffs and clans, chains and chances, you who held the tantalizing taste of freedom on your tongue, you who stepped up and stepped forward and stepped out, you who saw a vision of this land as one for all people, you who knew our pronoun should always be we, not them, not other, but sister and brother. To our great anonymous dead, lead us now against temptation to block the news, to close our eyes, to shrug, to sleep, to lay down and let it all die.
Bravo. Bravo.
Storm. The wind blows shingles off our house. Our house has been here a long time and has withstood much. But this, blow hard, full onslaught, bombardment, brute force since January. And the storm does not stop. We try to turn up our collars, stay inside, but the barrage of petty, of excess, of want, of power, of plenty lays us bare, naked, stripped, exposed, and exhausted. We are raw and ravaged, no safe shelter. Ice blocks every corner. Even spring will not bring solace. What may grow cannot be picked. Everyone who did has been deported.
Bravo. Bravo.
What could there be left to break? They say that broken bones will heal, that broken spirits will rise, that broken hearts will find love again. What will become of our broken country? The cracks have taken over our body, gouged our eyes, widened the gaps between right and left, and who is left? I can barely stand under the crushing weight of so much wrong. The cracks have taken over our body. It hurts to look at the news. It hurts to walk when so much is broken. The cracks have taken over, and the country we thought we had so strongly built together lies in jagged pieces under stomping feet. But I want to end on a good note. Ego tripping a la Nikki Giovanni. We were all born to be big, to light our minds on fire and feel its heat blazing. Born to walk on water when it turns ice, to see beyond saying, to listen beyond years. Born to write our name on so many pages, to show up in all our stages, to share our gifts, not to hoard in many storage units. Why are there so many storage units? Why acquire things to keep hidden and unused? Let's unlock our metal grates, open wide, let it all out.
Lovely. You know, as we were talking earlier, you inspired me. I want to share one more with you, and then I'm going to want you to do an encore. This is called, in the wisdom of Brother Ben Franklin, a republic, if you can keep it. They're dismantling our democracy piece by piece. I won't go into the details, I will be brief. The fox is in the hen house, the thieves are in the bank, the kettle's all a-boil and the sharks have left the tank. They've gutted law enforcement, the spineless guard the tower. We can see the whole thing crumbling. They've grabbed the whole damn thing, they may have it all in an hour. A republic, if you can keep it, Ben Franklin sagely quipped. Some of us saw it coming, we have that satisfaction, we're so goddamn hip. The guardians of democracy have been bribed. They're off their game. They've thrown it over the careerists that we shan't name. Polluted by the dollar. It's not like we didn't know. We're sort of optimistic. We hope it wouldn't happen soon, you know? We went first for security. They decapitated that. They made tracks for the banking. We might have predicted that. With all the safeguards now in shreds, law enforcement's all dispatched. They send in teams to collect the spoils. We can see the bloody tracks. The fox is in the henhouse. The cat's at the Canary. Let me guess, you're not still. You better go ask Larry. Impermanence is just a way. We rustle, hustle, come what may. Nice democracy you had there once. Too bad the bandits stole your lunch. Democracy was too boring to place close attention. That orange-faced baboon, the angry buffoon, has busted the furniture and soiled the room with his criminal cronies. Far too many to even mention.
The fox is certainly in the hen house.
So, my dear, if you can favor us with just one more.
Okay, let me find something. What is the shape of a hug?
Lovely.
The giant O's of arms, press of fingers against your back, the patting that so often comes with a hug. The huge hug, erasing all others, the fake hug, air kissing and high-pitched, how nice to see you, of those you know do not care if they ever see you again. The thank you hug, the baby hug, the sister and brother hug, the I'm sorry hug, and I'm so sorry, shudders of grief hug. The hurt hug, the harried hug, the hurried hug, the mommy hug that always smelled of powder, the daddy hug that never happened except in photos you were too young to remember, or maybe happened in ways you do not want to remember. The first love hug that electrified your spine and made you afraid your heart could be heard. The icky boss who shouldn't have hug. The hug yourself whenever you need it.
Lovely. What a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you so very, very much. If you want to send a graphic of the cover of your book and the link to it, I'll make sure they get in there, okay?
I sure will. I sure will. This was delightful. It was great just talking poetry with you. Thank you for doing this.
My pleasure indeed. Have a wonderful day, and don't be too busy. Give yourself a couple of.
And let me know when this posts so I can share it.
I will.
Okay.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.